Hi everyone, my name is Wendy, and I'm a machine learning engineer at Cash App. Today I'll be walking through a presentation about the building blocks for orchestration platforms using Prefect. I'm really excited to be a part of the Prefect Summit today, and excited to share our experiences using Prefect to build an internal system. A little bit about me. I'm currently a machine learning engineer at Cash App on the ML tools and training team, and I've been with Cash App for about 2 years now, and working with Prefect along the way to build this flexible and scalable orchestration platform used internally. Today on the agenda, we'll be talking about how workflows have evolved at Cash App, and we'll talk about how we identified these requirements and how we started to build with Prefect. And lastly, I'll share how we think about workflows going forward in the future. So how did we get here today, and how did workflows evolve at Cash App? A few years ago, we were working with Airflow, and I'm sure many of you in the audience know about Airflow and have used it before. To construct Airflow DAGs, it was really good for ETL pipelines, where you would write a SQL query, you would transform a data set and load it from one destination to another. And if you were lucky, you had a pretty small DAG, and if you had some very complex joins, this DAG could get very big very fast. But if you wanted to do more than what Airflow could offer, you might have noticed some limitations. And these limitations that we noticed were that, first, very large and small tasks would run on the same machine. Second, if you wanted to add custom Python packages, it wasn't that easy if you already had a default set of Python packages. And lastly, if you needed to have tasks exchange data, Airflow DAGs just weren't very good at that. And that's when we started to identify a new set of workflows that extended beyond SQL workflows, and we started to call them machine learning workflows. And so what are ML workflows specifically? They're doing things like pulling data, transforming features, splitting data sets, and training models. Those are just some examples of what we describe as ML workflows, and it does require just a lot more flexibility than SQL workflows that we described earlier. So what are the concrete requirements of a system like this? First of all, as a fintech company, we really needed a orchestration platform that offered a high level of security because of the sensitive data that we're working with. It also needed to be easy to use, easy enough for practitioners to be able to pick up on it and use it right away. And lastly, it just needed to be flexible enough to support the types of workflows I described earlier. And after a few conversations, more than a few conversations, we landed here with Prefect, and that's what we've been using ever since. I like to describe Prefect as a Python package which enhances Python development. It comes with a framework of tasks and decorators and execution features, all of which make Python development easy and observable, and even for remote jobs. Prefect has done a great job being recognized within the open source community, as you can see here. And next I'll talk about how we started to build with it. So with all the Prefect features, you can see how Prefect has actually a lot of features that you can get started with. There are things like schedules and workspaces and deployments and infrastructure blocks, and there's a lot to digest when you first get started. Prefect docs are very well written, and this is a shout out to the folks who are behind the scenes writing these docs. They're great and amazing. If you're not familiar with some of the Prefect concepts yet, feel free to take a pause and look over at these docs, but we'll be talking through some of these Prefect concepts shortly. And so to get started with Prefect, we identified two different roles in the platform to start using the platform. The first of which are users of the platform and admins of the platform. For users, they just want to get started with writing tasks, writing flows, and deploying it very quickly, as opposed to admins who might be concerned with allocating Prefect resources and ensuring that workers are healthy and available. So from a user's perspective, what are their goals concretely? A user's goal, and some of the things that we've heard internally are things like, hey, there's fraud going on. There's a certain type of fraud going on. Can we get up and running quickly? We also work with some sensitive data. Does your platform support this level of data security? Do you also support different development and production environments so we don't modify things in production directly? It has nothing to do with Hugging Face, but you can imagine if you provide all these requirements for users, all these features for users, it can really make them happy. And they just want to get up and running quickly and not really have to maintain it. So for users, it starts with developing a flow. And this flow is a example Prefect 2 flow. And you can see that it looks a lot like developing with Python. I like to think of it as a assembly line where you're constructing your workflow piece by piece, and you can iterate on it quickly, just like you can run Python main functions. Once a user is happy with their workflow and their flow, they are ready to sort of take it to the next level and productionize it. And that's where deployments come in. Deployments are a way for users to specify their flow so that it can be run not only on their local machine or their development machine, but it can be scheduled on a remote machine, and it can be scheduled with certain infrastructure like GCP or AWS. So this diagram shows what a user really sees. There are two users in this case. There's user A and user B. And say user A is using a GCP project. They can log in to Prefect, get an API, and start running flows, and the flow logs will appear in the Prefect workspace. They can also see their deployments and infrastructure blocks on this workspace as well. Depending on how infrastructure is provisioned in your org, another user might come along with the same infrastructure, or they might come with their own infrastructure. Nonetheless, they can also log in and start configuring flows, start writing flows, and also configuring deployments. All right, so now that we've talked about a user's perspective, let's now talk about an admin's perspective. And the goal of an admin really is to be able to provide a reliable job orchestration service and be able to manage workers up and down depending on how many jobs need to be scheduled. The admin is also in a place where they can share best practices about the patterns being developed. So if we extend that diagram, we can see that an admin here is concerned with the two components that we've added, which are the work pool and the worker. Behind the work pool is a worker who is a worker that is polling for jobs. So say I wanted to schedule a job at midnight and I wanted to run on my infrastructure, then at midnight the worker would pick up on this job and submit the job into my infrastructure. Admins are mainly concerned with workers and managing workers in this case. And you can imagine that workers would need to handle higher traffic at times when more users want to schedule their flows to run, for example, midnight or first thing in the morning at 9 a.m. or 8 a.m., depending on when you wake up. But serverless solutions today make it easy to scale up or down your worker instance. So in terms of the architecture, this diagram shows just the different Prefect components and how users and admins can use it to put together something that works for everybody. And one more thing I want to talk about is access control lists, a feature that Prefect has released pretty recently, if not in the last year, the previous year. This is how it looks like in the Prefect UI. It allows you to select email, service accounts, teams that have different access levels to different components in the Prefect UI. So things like configuring access to deployments and configuring access to flows itself, and very soon configuring access to work pools. And this enables a new type, an extended type of architecture that provides a certain level of isolation and better security. So we extended the previous diagram to have another worker for user B. So you can see now there's a side user A and user B. And for user A, they now have a dedicated worker that submits jobs into their own infrastructure, while the worker for user B now can submit jobs into user B's infrastructure. And so this provides a pattern of greater isolation. And we're really excited for these features. In terms of architecture pros, what we like about this architecture is that it simplifies all the prefect features down to ones that are relevant to a user or an admin. And Prefect as a whole makes it easy to configure deployments in regards to the infrastructure that you have. This architecture can be generalized to various cloud providers, including GCP Vertex or AWS ECS, whichever you're working with. And it always helps to have good documentation to allow internal customers to self-serve and onboard. Some cons are that if you don't need this level of flexibility, maybe your workflows are doing similar things, like they're doing ETL pipelines, then perhaps you don't need this level of flexibility from Prefect. And Prefect is different from other frameworks, so it does require a willingness to learn. And in terms of the UI components, things like workspaces aren't unlimited, so you just need to plan in advance how many workspaces you want to allocate to whichever users. And if you do decide to extend this architecture beyond one cloud provider, you may also be maintaining instances across cloud providers. Great, so now that we've talked about the architecture of the current system, just want to talk briefly about future workflows and share some key takeaways. So as workflows continue to evolve, what we think is happening is that these remote jobs just require higher and higher compute and things like GPUs, as they are training things beyond tree-based models and just training bigger and bigger models. We might see things like integrations with new platforms, and security and access patterns could potentially change. So now that we're here, you might be thinking, is it worth investing more in my orchestration platform? And the question we also had internally was, how do we evaluate a good orchestration platform? Some things that we've seen internally is that as this orchestration platform has matured, it's enabled more and more participants since it's made it accessible to more people. And as more people onboard, and they onboard more flows, and more teams also onboard. So you'll notice things like the worker needs to be scaled up to support this number of flows. You might also see more teams expressing interest in this platform, as the use case could be flexible enough to support what they need to do. So a few key takeaways from today's presentation. I hope you were able to see how building out this orchestration platform really started with identifying workflow needs internally. Next, using Prefect features to have the building blocks of an orchestration platform, and really thinking about Prefect features from the perspective of a user versus an admin. Lastly, you can take all of the Prefect features and design an architecture that really works for your infrastructure provisioning and your organization. Thank you. That wraps up the presentation, and I'd like to give a thank you to our partner teams at Block. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to send me an email. Thank you.